Hello everybody, I thought that I could share with you some thoughts today that could be of some help, hopefully, to the work that you are doing in the HR and communications community, which is mainly where you are. So, by the way, both of these functions have to do with engaging people. And I'm talking engaging people, engage in a very broad sense. I'm not talking about employee engagement in the narrower sense of doing questionnaires and doing lots of workshops after the questionnaires. That's kind of questionnaire engagement more than employee engagement, but that's a conversation for another day. I don't want to get into that now. But the question is whether engaging with people today in 2017 follows different rules than the more traditional ones that we all have learned, you, myself, and everybody else, because I think we are getting a bit tired of the traditional model. So I'm going to describe to you two worlds that allow you to recognize, because I think that they could be very useful for your work. And I'm going to ask you then to make a judgment on whether, navigating in one world or the other world is good or bad, or what can you do with that. So the modern HR and communications functions need to understand this. So I'm very keen to share these principles and then see what we can do with them. So there is something I have described in one of my books, Homo Imitans, as a world one. And world one is simply the world where communications information is the currency. And this currency goes up and down the organization, usually down from the top. Sometimes you and I use the terminology, we push information, we cascade down information, we package this information. It's a push world. We go usually from top to bottom, most of the time like a tsunami of information that comes from the top, and we want everybody to know. This world likes the hierarchical system because it needs the channels to go through from the top to the bottom, and it's a world where anything that has to do with educating people, sensitizing them, training is good, is there, is where we are. I think most people will recognize this world as most of our 9-to-5 world. Sometimes it feels that all we do is being some sort of information traffic wardens in the system. But this is a world. But there's a second world, which we call World 2, which is very different. And World 2 is the one where the currency is not information, is not communication, it's behaviors. And behaviors is something that people do, people exhibit, that is visible, that is concrete. You may like them or not. They may be good or bad, but they are there, they are visible. And this world, the behavioral world, has completely different rules. Behaviors spread and multiply by being copied by other people. It's not by the information that you put in PowerPoints. Actually, behaviors hate PowerPoints. You can put words in PowerPoints, but they are words, they are not behaviors. Behaviors is when people do something. So this world is a world where the social influence around you matters much more than it matters in World 1. So what you see around you, what other people do, we copy each other. We are an incredibly sophisticated copying machine, even if we'd like it or not. Evolution gave us the Homo sapiens, and we are very proud of that, and we are very rational, and we know that we want to do. But in reality, he never got rid of what I call Homo imitans, which is how we imitate each other, how we copy each other, good or bad. And you see that in the office, in the kindergarten, in the social arena, everywhere else. We are, as I said, a very good copying machine, but Homo sapiens doesn't like that and say, no, I'm not copying anybody, it's just myself. And I think we have underestimated the importance of this copying element inside organizations. And if we understood the power, I think functions like HR, communications, etc., will look very different. But that's World 2, and World 2 is therefore the world where behavioral change, cultural change, new norms sit. So you see these two worlds. One, I repeat, information-based that goes ups and down, is a push system. And the world 2, which is behavioral-based, which I call a pull system, because in reality with my behavior, I'm pulling other behaviors around, and the other way around as well. I'm pulled, whether I like it or not, to the behaviors that I see around. But an interesting thing as well is that the mathematics that are behind these two worlds are very different. And this is very, very interesting, because in world one, the information world, communication world, you aim sometimes to the entire organization, a big group, with a communication package, a communication system. And you know very well that when you do that, some people pay attention to that. From the people who pay attention to that, some people start thinking of doing something, and eventually some people do something. So, so it creates like little bubbles. It's not terribly efficient. It's an attrition model. It goes from big aims, big targets, to something that often is small. Now, as a non-very efficient model and creates these things, intuitively what we do is to repeat again. So we do another communication plan, and another communication plan, and another one, hoping that eventually people will do something about that. But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work very well, because as you know very well as well, by the third time people switch off. They have enough of things coming to me all the time. This is initiative number 23 this week, so I don't know what we're talking about. However, in world two, the behavioral world, the maths are completely in reverse, because you start with some people doing something and other people copying that, good or bad, and making no judgment. It creates some critical mass. Suddenly many people are doing something in a particular way, and eventually everybody seems to be doing the same, good or bad. Now, that could be bad if you are talking about bad behaviors that are spreading in society or in the streets or anywhere else. But it could be also very good if we have the right behaviors inside the organization, where people are copying them without any training program of any kind, and it creates an environment, a culture, a kind of engagement which is very good. And often happens without people knowing how that happened. There was no training program about that, when in the world one there is always some kind of training program one way or another. So these two worlds, this is the interesting part, need to work together. I'm sure you understand that and you imagine that. There is no way we are going to get rid of the top-down communication systems of World One. They are there for a reason, because people need to know what's going on, understand the strategy, understand the goals, the rules of the game, etc., etc. But if that's the only thing we did, we'll be in a constant inefficient system. We need the world to the pool world to come in, plug in, and amplify in behavioral terms everything that is being said or talked about in World One. So mastering the connection, the synchronization on World One, World Two is the key things that organizations need to do, and functions like HR, communications, etc. should be at the core of that, should be the masters of this plus between the two worlds, which sometimes doesn't happen, because you and I probably would agree that we are very good at World Ones. We are very good at creating meetings, committees, and communication systems, and cascading down and series of workshops all over the place. We are very good at that. World Two, pulling things, behaviors, scaling up, understanding how that works, is not something that is that easy, or at least is not something that is being even taught that much in management training or everything. So we are not that good at that. We say, well, yes, this informal organization where people pull each other and copy each other is there. Yes, we know, but I don't know what to do with that. And in reality, the highest source of trust and power to change things is there in this world too, where people copy each other and in a spontaneous world. Because this world too requires a few ingredients, and this is vital. There are 5 of them that we use in viral change. I want to give you a panorama of that, obviously, without the time to get into detail. Number 1 is behaviors, because we just said that this is a behavioral world, so you need to know which behaviors are the ones that you need, that you have to have in the system. Now, many of you in your companies will say, well, we have that. We have behaviors, we have declared them, they are there in a piece of paper. Okay, congratulations, very good. in my experience, many times I go and try to scratch the surface of what is behind these behaviors. I don't see behaviors. You see, with my behavioral hat and behavioral sciences, behavior is not just a word. Accountability and teamwork and honesty, they are not behaviors. They are words. They are values. They are whatever you want to call them. But behavior is something concrete. I want to know what is that somebody who we say is doing accountability, what is that he or she does, that I can say, okay, that's accountability. So I'm very sort of narrow in my view of what a behavior is, but we're going to have to need to have behaviors. So do you have them, yes or no? And this doesn't happen on the back of an envelope on one day to making that. But once you have behaviors, the second ingredient that we need is a mechanism of influence of these behaviors. So the question here is, well, we know that we copy each other, but do we all copy each other in a kind of equal way? Doesn't really matter who we copy. Do we copy the top leaders all the time, as the traditional view of the organization says? The role models are at the top and we copy them. I can't remember last time that I saw an employee coming into the car park at 9 o'clock in the morning saying, I'm going to see how I can copy my CEO today, because that will tell me what to do today. I can't remember seeing that, so I think this copying of the top is completely overrated, but that's a conversation for another day. The strongest source of copying and influence inside the organization, if I had time we can develop that for hours, is peer-to-peer. Clear, there's plenty of data about that, and the peer-to-peer networks, the peer-to-peer influence is, in all the data we have, twice as much, more or less twice, stronger and more powerful than the hierarchical influence. So that's very interesting, because you have the hierarchical system on one way, which is very useful to give guidelines, to say where we are going, to produce a well-one communication system, which people need to frame, to understand that there is a value system, there is a strategy, all these things that you know very well and we are very good at mapping and creating. But in reality, that hierarchical system power is not powerful enough at all to create cultures, to create ways of doing, styles of doing, environments. That's the peer-to-peer. So you have these two powers kind of working with each other, the top-down and the peer-to-peer, and for some things the top-down is very powerful to tell you what to do and who is paying you and what are the guidelines and what are the KPIs. But for creating cultures, changing things, engaging people, there is no brainer, as we say, well, two peer-to-peer networks are twice as much powerful. And again, plenty of data around that, so it's not just getting out of the air. So that's the second ingredient. So we have behaviors, we have peer-to-peer influence, and now, surprise, surprise, we need to master that in the informal organization. Why in the informal? Because these peer-to-peer networks don't work through committees and teams and task forces and things like that. That's world one. That's the structure of the formal system. So in this world too, is the informality of the system that works. Is the peer-to-peer conversations that happen in the corridor, in the canteen, in the men's rooms, or in ladies' rooms, or whatever it is. This is where stuff happens. This is where actually new ideas, innovation comes from that side. Again, an area that traditionally functions like HR and communications and management in general have said, yeah, we know that, it's there, it's a kind of peer pressure stuff, but we don't know what to do with that. We are so good at doing meetings and committees that we just forgot that is there. The fourth component is storytelling. We need the stories to bring in and close the loop with everything that is there in the organization. And the fifth thing is what we call backstage leadership, which is the art of the leaders in World 1 to support what's happening in the World 2 behavioral, pool, informal organization without dictating it, without giving the PowerPoints. Supporting the peer-to-peer networks, the health of the peer-to-peer networks, but without telling exactly what to do. So all these things, as you can imagine and you can feel, they are competences. They are kind of new, some of them more than others. We need HR communications in other organizations to master that, because this is where things happen. The mastering of the World One top-down systems is there. We can be more sophisticated on using more media, less media, and more targeting, less targeting, but in reality, repeat, we know how to do that more or less. World 2 and the synchronization of both things is what really is going to matter, and this just some thoughts that I want to share with you, because you see, something that is crucial to understand once you see the difference between the World 1 and the World 2 is that things that belong to World 1, like communications, do not have the power to create something that belongs to World 2, like change, behavioral change or cultural change. Communication is not change. Communication may be an ingredient of the organization, and it may be an ingredient for change, but communication per se is not change. Sorry for those of you who are in communication functions, and by the way, you say we are also in the change business. Well, tell me how you do that, because it's not necessarily something that happens. So anything that has to do with cultures are not creating bar training, they are not creating in classrooms, is about the peer-to-peer networks that need to be mastered, and this is where I suggest the new HR functions, the new communications functions need to master and need to understand. But there is a science and sciences and disciplines behind that. So it's not something that you do in the back of an envelope and say, okay, so let's have peer-to-peer networks. Well, how does it work? Because we can orchestrate that. We can manage that somehow. We can make sure that they work. So there is lots of things that we can do. Now, as soon as you start talking about large-scale mobilization of people, which is using the World 1 and World 2 together and doing the scale-up and the top-down together, you are talking about movement, social movement. So the mechanics, the logic, the rationale, everything that happens in this synchronization is the one of social movements. So social movements is always been understood by business as something that is outside there, you see on the television screens or in the books, but actually nothing to do with us. No, HR and comms, that nothing to do with that. Actually, that's completely wrong. The social movement frame, which is the one I'm describing now, which is the same I said before, is at the core on how to manage an organization. Actually, I think management of a modern organization is the management of a social movement. Culture is creating a social movement. It doesn't get better than that. It's not indoctrinating people. It's putting together these World 1, World 2 mechanisms and in a synchronized way. But social movements gets more interesting now, don't work with methods. There is not a method for a social movement the same as a method to install a piece of software or a change management method of some kind. Social movements actually need what we call platforms. And platforms are different, because platforms are a series of rules, mechanisms, synchronization of things, in our case behavioral, I'll explain in a second, that they kind of been installed in the organization, as opposed to be a method to go from A to B, is installing something that actually creates like a new operating system. We call it that. It's an operating system. So an operating system in which behavioral-based management, peer-to-peer networks, mastering the informal organization, a storytelling system comes in, and backstage leadership, they all work beautifully together, and they stay there for, dare I say, forever. So once you have a platform like that in the system, you can throw to the platform anything that you need. It could be a change towards customer centrism, or towards agility, or whatever it is, the aim of the change or the cultural shaping. The platform will take care of that, but the platform stays there as a capacity. Platforms build capacity in the system. Methods usually don't. Methods take you from A to B and then say goodbye, call me back when you need something. Platform stays there. Now, I have an anecdote which is I want to share with you, which is that I think it's relevant, because I was a few days ago I was in Ireland, where we are doing with my team a vast cultural change shaping of the health system in the country, the entire health system. So we have the entire country, 120,000, I think it is, more or less, the employees that they are in the system. They are the largest employer in the country, like happens in many other places, that the health system is the largest employer. So we've been doing work for a while in different places. Obviously, we haven't addressed the entire country yet, but we are getting there. And there is an area in which we've been there for a couple of years doing something and creating this platform and helping people to work peer-to-peer and all these things. And they were telling me the other day that, as you know, we are in the kind of the flu season, and in the flu season, people need vaccinations. But vaccines in many parts of the world, some people like them, some people don't, some people say, I don't have time for that. The health system says you need to be vaccinated if you are over 60, for example, and by the way, you are a worker in the healthcare system, you should be vaccinated because you have a higher risk, but you can't impose people to get vaccinated. So in many cases, doctors don't have time for that themselves. Even they are saying that you should, but they don't do it, and nurses the same. So it gets very messy and not very effective. And there is this anecdotal evidence that where in the places where we have had a peer-to-peer network that has learned to work together, actually there is an increase in the intake of the vaccinations, because it's peer-to-peer, nurse-to-nurse, doctor-to-doctor saying we have to do that, actually we should do that, etc. The system is not dictating, but there is a peer-to-peer effect that increases enormously this probability that this is being taken. So the World One system was there saying you should be vaccinated, and by the way, here it is, but it didn't happen as much until the peer-to-peer network of the platform took over and say, well, that's what you should do. So I think it's a wonderful example of how when you install a platform or that kind of people platform, because there are technology platforms and business platforms, this is a people platform that we call viral change. When this is installed there is this extended consequences that go beyond the original targets of agility or customer centrism or accountability or safety. All that is there, and you work on that, or spreading the values, deploying a value system that we do quite a lot. All that is there, but actually what I'm trying to say is that people learn on top of that to do this peer-to-peer, to work on the informal organization, to see behaviors before everything else, to do a storytelling. All that, they're the new skills and capabilities that organizations get. And I think this is fascinating, because for the first time we have a non-method that leaves something behind, that creates capacity for the future, no matter what the target is. So I really suggest to you that the HR communications functions should be at the core of this thinking. I mean, anybody could be, certainly management, leadership, but I can't think of any other functions that could take that space and say, okay, so we are going to know how to do that, and we are going to change engagement. It doesn't get better than on a peer-to-peer basis. So the reflections I'd like to leave with you is, first of all, do you want to be in the World 1 or World 2? You have to be in both, but do you know where you are operating? If you feel, yeah, I'm mainly operating in World 1 and that's it. Okay, yeah, fine, there's nothing wrong with that, but just be aware it's very limited, and you can go forever and still being paid, but you are not going to create high impact, because you need the other side. You need the World 2 and the pull effect. So which one you want to use? World 1, by definition, works on a kind of addition model. So you add bodies, 2 bodies and 2 bodies. So you have a training program, so you train 50 and then you train another 100, and then you give a PowerPoint package to another 200. So it builds on adding things. In World 2 works with a multiplication model. So you have some people doing something, other people do something, and multiplies and gets bigger. So you want to be in the addition world or in the multiplication world? As I said at the beginning, I think you have to be in both, but be careful that you don't mix them, because they are very different worlds with different. So skills and competences for HR and comms, I think that they are there. almost at your doorstep, just trying to, waiting for you to grab them. Many of you have already done it, but there is this shift on the shifts that are happening sometimes naturally in organizations, sometimes orchestrating. For example, the shift from a push to a pull, the shift from a top down to a more grassroots and bottom up, the shift from more processes and systems which are there. There is nothing wrong with that. Shift towards behaviors more than anything else. From the formal organization to the formal organization, all these are at the same time shifts in skills and competences that the new HR functions and the new communications functions have to have. It's unavoidable. We cannot continue in 2017 to have a traditional view of the organization that is rather mechanistic, that served well for many years when everything perhaps was more predictable and linear, and you knew that if you did something and you put so many people perhaps in a leadership program, you get leaders, etc. This world is gone. We want all of that in one afternoon. We can't wait for the sequence of things to happen in a pristine way. With the traditional change management, used to say you have 8 steps for change management and you have to follow one. Sorry, that was 20 years ago. It's not anymore. We want all the steps in one afternoon. And that's where the platforms of change come in. And by the way, on that note, I would say, without trying to offend anybody, that change management per se, in the way we knew it, is dead. Well, maybe it's not dead, but let's call it retired, because it's retired. I mean, it has nothing to say in 2017. The only thing that has to say is social movements and large-scale mobilization and the behavioral base and the informal organization and grassroots and orchestrating all that. That's where we are. And if you have any doubts, well, switch your TV on when you go home and see what's going around the world, whether it's in the US or Europe or whatever, and don't tell me that you need 8 steps to change from A to B, because I haven't seen the 8 steps or the 10 or whatever. So, good news and bad news, I suppose. The bad news is that we have to abandon some of the old toolkits. They are not going to work anymore, and that's tough because we all are used to do things in a particular way. The good news, I think, is that it's very exciting. The whole thing, the whole new world and possibilities of reshaping and rethinking functions like HR, OD, communications, is something there saying, come on, let's do it in a different way. Enough is enough of that. And there are new tools, new things, but need to be borrowed from outside the borders of the traditional business management. Quite frankly, if you're interested in these areas, forget MBAs. You need to learn epidemiology, and you need to learn social movements, and you need to learn people platforms and all that stuff, which still is not your mainstream thing. But it's very exciting to be able to say, I'm in a function that actually has a life in front that could be very, very different than the one that we had before, and we could occupy those spaces of large-scale mobilization of people, new concept of engagement, as I say, getting grassroots moving, and that is a completely, I think it's a bit of a revolution in the way we understand management, leadership, communications, and things like that. So I hope this helps. It's a long conversation with you, with no ability to chat with you maybe another day, but I hope it helps at least to see these possibilities. I think the word possibilities is a magic one, and I think sometimes, not speaking for yourselves, but knowing other colleagues in your areas, there is a little bit of no possibilities. This is how it's been done, this is what is expected, this is what we do. And I think that's wrong, and I think that's just sad. And unless you are a masochist, I think that there is a fantastic world in front that is just wanting to be grabbed provided that you look at that with different lenses and therefore different skills and different training and different reading and everything else. For example, one of the things that we plug into Viral Change is, as you can imagine, is network theory, because you need to understand how networks work. The organization is a network, so if you don't know anything about how networks function, how can you understand the organization? How can, you think about it, for how long have we been going on understanding OD and HR, etc., and not understanding network theory? So some people told me the other day, said, do you mean we have to learn network theory? Well, you bet. I mean, what we want to learn? And astrophysics? I mean, yes, it's network theory, means it's organizations, and therefore you need to learn. But there's a lot of maths there. Well, maybe a few, but I don't think it's rocket science either. I'm not a mathematician. I'm a psychiatrist by background, for goodness sake. So if I can understand networks, anybody can. But yes, there is an effort to be made on jumping to new disciplines. Do you mean we have to learn social movements? Absolutely. I mean, it's not an anecdote. So Viral Change, which is where I sit and is the service that we provide, gets all that together, all that in one place, and helps people to be trained and to change organizations and hopefully a little bit of the world with different lenses. But I think the ingredients are there, and you can think about it. And I hope that these rambling concepts get somewhere and they are helpful to you. And on that note, and I know that you care about your functions and the roles that you have, I wish you every success for the future. Thanks very much.